Hello, hello. Now, as some of you know, or if you don't, well, the Japanese DDs will be coming in a couple of days. The 1st of December, I think it's for EU, probably the same for NA as well. Now, here you can see how they are being moved around and what's the name of the new ships. Now, I've already covered the new Fubuki, which was under the code name Ayanami for me. I've covered the Akatsuki, which I consider to be a very, very strong gunboat. And I've covered the Gunboat, which is the so-called new T9 torpedo boat, aka replacing the Kagero, which I also quite liked, but it was very similar to the Kagero. Today I will be covering the so-called torpedo boat Akatsuki and the so-called gunboat Shiratsuyu. The reason I'm covering both of them is because, well, the comparison they make is quite interesting, and by quite interesting I also mean quite confusing. And I figured it would be good to refresh the memories since there's a lot of new names being introduced, so you guys know where these exactly fit. The first ship I will be covering will be the Shiratsuyu. So, as promised, this is the Shiratsuyu, which is the T7 gunboat. At least, well, it is in the gunboat tree, but whether or not this is a gunboat is something that can be argued quite a bit. Now, the first thing I should probably mention is that weird consumable you see on my G key. Now, that is the same thing you have on the Akatsuki, which reduces the cooldown of your torpedo reload to 5 seconds. Now, on the Akatsuki it makes sense because, well, it's a gunboat, it only has 1x4 torpedo launchers, so you need that consumable to be able to launch a proper volley that is 2x4 instead of just the usual 1x4. But on the Shiratsuyu, which is the T7, aka the one before the Akatsuki, the gunboat, in the gunboat line, on this one you have 2x4 torpedo launchers. They are 10 km torpedoes, they hit hard, they got a decent speed, but when you use the consumable, you of course reduce the cooldown on both of them to 5 seconds, which means you can, in essence, within like 8 seconds, you can launch 16 torpedoes. So you are literally capable of launching a bigger volley than a Shimakaze can in this supposed T7 gunboat. So that I would say is extremely confusing, or well, extremely confusing for me as well, because at least because this is supposed to be in the gunboat line. This is supposed to be the ship you use right before. See here, you see I use the consumable. You see how my torpedoes are reloaded, and bam, I can launch the next volley. So I launch 2 massive volleys at both the Torpedos, and now the Mayhem spots me, so I smoke up and I start fighting him. And what's interesting here is that the guns you have are pretty much the stock IJN torpedo boat guns. In fact, you have less guns than you have on the Akatsuki, which is the torpedo boat. That ship has 3x2. This one has 2x2 and a 1-barrel turret. So you have 1 gun less. You can see my torpedoes are reaching it. Remember, this is the gunboat. This is supposed to be the gunboat. This is in the gunboat line. But you can see just how much havoc this massive volley. These are T8 battleships, and they're just being completely. Both of them just got wrecked. Both of them had to use their repairs. And now, of course, I hammer on them with a cheat to start some fires on them. So, this is the gunboat? That's so confusing to me. I mean, yes, the torpedo tubes, the torpedoes are on a longer cooldown. They are on a 90-second cooldown. But thanks to this consumable, every 4 minutes you basically launch this massive, highly destructive volley that almost makes the Shimakaze jealous. And this is the so-called gunboat. And of course, I can't spick it. In fact, I used my Shimakaze captain on this, because there's no point for going for a gunboat spec on this ship, because it's a goddamn torpedo boat. I mean, no matter what they call it, you saw that it was in the split line right before the Akatsuki. It's supposed to be the... Oh, the Hipper has Hydra and is rushing me. It's supposed to be the gunboat, but it's more of a torpedo boat than anything, because, well, the torpedoes do so much more damage than you can with your guns. You have the same extremely slow turret traverse that you have on the torpedo boats. You have the same slow reload. It's nothing like the Akatsuki at all, which is a quintessential gunboat. For some reason, this is a complete torpedo boat and nothing else to it. And this is why I wanted to cover both of these, because the placement of the ship in the tree and in general the design of this ship is highly confusing. I assume the idea was that they wanted to introduce this new consumable before you get it on the Akatsuki. They wanted to introduce it, but it doesn't fit this ship at all. This ship doesn't fit it in the tree where it is at all. Its positioning makes no sense. Even worse, the T6 ship before this, that's not a gunboat either. It has the same type of sluggish, slow guns. So what you have in the so-called gunboat tree is 2 torpedo boats, and then all of a sudden you get to the Akatsuki, which is a pure gunboat. I mean, that's the quintessential gunboat when it literally has 1x4 torpedo tubes. And 1x4 especially, you could, on default you only launch 4 torps at a time. That is the definitive gunboat, but these are like ultimate torpedo boats and nothing else. It's so strange because it also makes it almost impossible to use the same captain. In fact, the fact that these are preview versions and I've been able to move in captains in and out as I like means that I've been running the Shimakaze captain on every single DD except for the Akatsuki, where you need a completely different captain because it's a completely different ship. So any ideas that players might have had that, well, they'll just make a new gunboat captain for the gunboat line of IJN DDs, well, it makes no sense because there's no point in running a gunboat captain on what is essentially 2 torpedo boats. In fact, the only way to get anything out of the line is basically being forced to respec your captain once you reach the T8, aka the Akatsuki. So confusing? Yes, I mean, what is this? What is the Shiratsuyu doing in this tree? Now, don't get me wrong though. Even though I am criticizing heavily the positioning in the tree and the entire tree, how the design of the tree itself and all of this, even though I'm criticizing this heavily, the ship is fun and the ship is very, very strong. Being able to launch these ridiculous 16 torp volleys at T7 is absolutely hilarious, and you can get some really stupid double strikes and things like this that you can't really get in any other DD except maybe the Shimakaze, because you can just launch torps everywhere like a madman, and so many lower tier ships aren't used to it, and you can catch battleships rushing your smoke. First you launch 2 volleys of torps, they think it's safe, then you hit your consumable and you launch another 2 ones and they're like, what the hell just happened? How can you have that many volleys? It's fun. It's in fact hilarious to play. One of the strongest torpedo boats in the game, I would say. I mean, probably without doubt one of the strongest torpedo boats in the game, simply because it can launch so many high-powered 10 km torps everywhere. So a fantastic boat, but what the hell is this boat doing in the gunboat line? Why on earth is it there? What were they thinking when they designed this? Now, the even weirder thing is that this ship actually has, well, I'm using the Shimakaze captain, so I am cheating a bit, but for T7 ship with the concealment captain is a 5.8 5.8 km concealment, which means, well, you can take on Benson's Fubukis, you spot them the same time they spot you. So this ship, especially if you get a captain for it, punches up extremely well. Even if you don't have a captain, and you face Benson's and Fubukis that don't have a captain either, well, then you got what, 6.4 km concealment. So once again, it punches up extremely well, and overall it's just a great ship. It's a really, really good torpedo boat. I have very little critique against the ship itself. In fact, it might become one of the better performing IJN DDs in the entire line, well, except maybe for the Akatsuki, which is borderline overpowered because of how strong it is, even though it does have some straight up weaknesses like angling and such. But angling against it being a weakness is not something that will affect its stats that much, since the average player will rarely actually do that against you. But this ship is going to be real nasty. I mean, I'm so used to kind of, battleships lately have been fairly coddled with HE being removed from Royal Navy, and in general, it feels like they have been going very soft on battleships in general. Well, this ship is anything but soft on battleships, I can tell you that. This amount of torps you can launch. Let's see, can I find his Mayhem? Yep, found the Mayhem. Launched some blind torps, a bit unnecessary since I proximity spotted him right after. But, here example, I launched 1 volley at the Mayhem in the smoke. Now there's the turrets on the other side of these cliffs, so I'm gonna launch, well, let's launch one, let's see, is he gonna turn in? There's a high chance he might turn in. Yeah, let's launch one volley in case he turns in, and then we hit our consumable. And now we can launch where the predicted path is as well. Let's launch one a bit on the right, then one a bit on the left. And the amount of torps you can spew out in this thing is absolutely insane. Such a stupidly, well, not stupidly, but extremely strong ship. Now, of course, a gunboat will straight up beat this guy. Because, once again, this isn't a gunboat. It's in the gunboat line, yes, but it is a torpedo boat. So Farragut's, Mayhems, Bensons, if they get the jump on it, they will absolutely shit on this ship in a straight up fight, unless they eat the torp, of course. But when it comes to pure gunpower, this guy has nothing to say to them. It has 5 guns, that's it. It's in the gunboat line, but it's not a gunboat. It's a torpedo boat, which makes no sense. But the ship itself, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Hilarious to play, extremely strong. In fact, if you're going down the gunboat line, well, you get to look forward to not only this ship, but you also get to look forward to the fantastic Akatsuki as well. So, absolutely brilliant in every single way. Anyway, now, since I covered this one, now I'll move over to the so-called Torpedo Boat in the upcoming line. Right, well, now you saw the so-called gunboat in the gunboat line. Now we're moving on to the torpedo boat in the torpedo line, which is replacing where the old Hatsuharu was. This is the new Hatsuharu, well, it's replacing where the old Hatsuharu was. This is the Akatsuki, which is the new one. Now, the first thing you might notice when you look at it is that, yes, this one has, well, first of all, the concealment is worse. The other one with the 15-point captain and 5.8, this one has 6.4, which of course means without 15-point captain, you're looking at 7 km plus concealment. So the concealment is pretty goddamn garbage on the torpedo boat. The gunboat is better, the so-called gunboat is better than this one. Doesn't make much sense. But anyway, and another thing you might notice is that it has 3x2 guns. It got 2 double turrets in front and 1 double turret in 2 double turrets in the back and 1 double turret in the front. So it has better gunpower than the so-called gunboat Shiratsuyu, which isn't a gunboat. And finally, torpedo-wise, well, it has significantly better cooldown on them. I'm of course using the 10% reload on the torps, so it's got 68 seconds with that captain perk. But it still can only launch 3x3 torps, aka, well, it's better than the Hatsuharu's 2x3, but it's still only 9 torps. And it doesn't have any awesome consumable, any special thing going on. So it's a pretty bog standard torpedo boat, except it has better gunpower than the so-called gunboat. Now, these torpedoes are sometimes a bit sketchy to get hits with. I mean, it might be simply because I haven't played it a lot. It does feel better than the Hatsuharu, especially in situations like this, when you see a DD smoke up, trying to get some hits on an enemy DD with the Hatsuharu when you only have 6 torp, well, that is going to be difficult. However, when you have 9 torps and you can make a wide spread like that, well, you actually have a significantly higher chance, of course, of landing those hits and killing off any DD that's hiding in the smoke, just like that. So, definitively stronger in that sense. And the gunpower, well, once again, a lot stronger than what the Hatsuharu had. I'm of course using AP since it's a shores, very, very squishy armor, and of course I citadel him. But the one thing I notice quite often on the ship is that I end up using my guns a lot in this ship. Like, really, really a lot. A surprisingly big chunk of my damage is coming from my guns. It might have to do with the concealment not being that good, or maybe because simply the gunpower is pretty decent for a IJN DD especially, but I find myself using the guns all the time, which is strange, because once again, this is the so-called torpedo boat. In fact, I find myself using the guns a lot more in this torpedo boat than I find myself using them in the so-called gunboat. So, you understand, now you probably understand why I am commenting on both of these T7s in their respective lines at the same time, because not only does their placement not make much sense to me, their design doesn't make much sense to me either, considering how they perform, how they act, how their ships behave. Launch some torps at the Scharnhorst. I'm just gonna speed boost away. I'm tempted to shoot at the shores, but honestly I don't want a shore shooting at me. That's too many shells. Of course I have the, you're not really this tanky, you gotta consider I'm using a 15-point captain, so I have of course survivability expert. Of course the one gap I leave in my torpedo path is the one where the Scharnhorst sails through. That's pretty classic. Looks like his guns are aimed away, the shores is still sailing away, so might as well take some pot shots at this guy. Once again, turret traverse extremely sluggish, just like on the Shiratsuyu. In fact, it has just the same guns, the only difference is this one has, where the Shiratsuyu has a single turret, this guy has a double turret. That's pretty much the only difference, gun-wise. Getting some hits in. Undetected at this point. Like, I've been tempted to almost run a stealth gunboat setup on this ship, but the only thing that's really been keeping me down or away from that idea is that the concealment is simply pretty shit. I mean, if you don't have a 15-point captain, which I don't, your average player will not have a 15-point captain at tier 7. That's not going to happen. So your average player is going to have to suffer with 7.2, I think, concealment. 7.2 km concealment on an IJN DD. There's no way of putting that nicely. That is absolute garbage. And the worst part is you're going to be facing, with that concealment, that means you are going to be spotting ships like Leningrad, like Bliska. You're going to be spotting them at the same time they spot you. So pushing into a cap is not going to be very much fun. And if these guys have been leveling their captains, which people often do in premium ships, especially the Leningrad, well, they might be using their Russian DD captain on it. Well, then the Leningrad is going to have better concealment than you have. In fact, I think the Leningrad gets down to what, 6.3 if you use a 15-point captain. So you're gonna get outspotted by a Russian gunboat, which is pretty goddamn brutal, no matter how you put it. It's just gonna be nasty. Ships like the Kiev, well, you can outspot him at least, but even things like Mayhem, well, you have a I think it has 7.5 concealment, the Mayhem, so you'll have a few hundred meters of warning, which really isn't that much considering you'll have to start turning and all of this. So this ship doesn't really feel that comfortable as a torpedo boat at all. In fact, out of the ones I played, this one might feel like one of the weakest in general. The Novaki is another possibility. The Novaki is of course the new Kagero, basically the T8 Kagero. That one also felt a bit weird, but that could just be that I haven't played it enough. But somehow, yeah, I probably haven't played it enough, honestly. I'm going to chuff it up more to that. I'm not going to make any definitive statements on the Novaki until I've played it more. But this one does feel strange. The Shiratsuyu feels strange, but that's because it's so awesome. It feels so goddamn strong. This one, in every way. I mean, Hatsuharu wasn't exactly a gem, and in terms, compared to the Hatsuharu, it's hard to go down. Well, it's hard to make a ship, an IJN DD that's really worse than the Hatsuharu, because that ship is kind of considered to be, that and the Mutsuki was never really considered to be any gems. And in terms of gun power and torpedo power, it's definitely an upgrade. There can be no doubt about it. It's just that the concealment is not that much fun on this ship. It really isn't much fun to have to struggle with really terrible concealment on tier 7. I'm a bit surprised that they made the concealment as bad as they did. I don't really understand the reasoning, especially since they made the Shiratsuyu concealment better. And usually the way it goes in this game is that the better gunboat you are, the worse concealment you have. That is of course to bring some basic balance into it, because there's no fun playing a torpedo boat if you get constantly outspotted by gunboats. They can open fire before you can even see them. They can start wrecking you before you have a time to react. That's not fun. That's something you can't counter, and something you can't counter isn't a fun playstyle because you feel helpless. That's one of the reasons, for example, I strongly criticize the Belfast, because radar plus smoke means there's really not much you can do to counter him. Now, that's kind of the same case here with the Akatsuki. It places you in a position where you often find yourself eating uncounterable damage you couldn't possibly have planned ahead for. So in general, I found myself playing fairly far back on this ship. In fact, you probably want to be pushing into caps kind of like you play on a Russian DD, meaning supporting other destroyers. You're kind of like the backup to your buddy destroyer who goes somewhere. You don't really want to be the lonely guy into the cap unless you have a lot of support, because, well, especially if the enemy has Bluskas or Leningrads or something like that, because, well, when you run face first into them, well, you're gonna eat a lot of damage while you try to get away. Yes, you have improved gun power, but once again, let's not confuse improved gun power with actually being a gunboat. There is a significant difference. You can have decent gun power, but still not be a gunboat, and there's a big difference between those two. This New Mexico looks like it's fleeing. Once again, you can see how much I've been, you might, I don't know if you guys noticed, but constantly using my guns. Constantly shooting, constantly shooting. Yes, I landed, that's my second torp, but in general, just a lot of gun power, over 100 hits already. And you might think, well, that's maybe this game, but I try to always choose games that kind of reflect on how I feel about the ship in general, or how I feel it behaves in general. And this is kind of that kind of a game where you don't really feel like you're getting all those torp hits you usually want, and it's more about, well, the guns. You use the guns to get that additional damage in and having that additional impact on the game. Let's see if I can hit the Leningrad. Once again, not a gunboat. The arcs, well, they are not good at this range. I mean, they're not a disaster, you can hit with it, but yeah, you're not going to become any sort of long-range sniper in this thing. And that's, of course, one of the reasons also why the whole idea of a stealth-firing build is kind of Let's see, can push into this camp. Already starting to look like this is going to be a win though. In fact, I don't see how we can, well, it's a random battle, anything is possible, especially if you're playing solo. Never underestimate your team's ability to throw games. But if you do manage, once again, to get into a position where you can use this, you see the damage, it's 17k per torp. So that's a lot of damage you can put out with these volleys. No argument about that. In fact, if you manage to ambush someone or surprise someone, the damage you do is no joke. So, not strictly a bad ship. In fact, I'm not going to call this a bad ship by any means, because I feel it still is an improvement on the Hatsuharu. It's just that there's been a lot of power creep, especially in T7, thanks to all these premium ships that have come out. Especially there's been the Belfast, the Leningrad, the Bliska, and all these that have upped the ante at T7 significantly. And then now, of course, there's also been additions of things like the Fiji as well. So there's a lot of new strength at T7. And I mean, it's not a bad ship. Here we get an example. This New Mexico doesn't realize there's troops coming towards me. He's already mid-turn. And now when he spotted him, it's too late. And when you do get this, well, you do a shit ton of damage. These are IJN DD torps, so even on a New Mexico that has a fairly good torpedo belt, well, he hits a lot of hits. And at this point, of course, smoke up and the good old HE spam, which once again, because you have more guns, is more effective, and even the alpha damage is pretty decent. So once again, not a bad boat, but I wonder how awesome it would be to have the Shiratsuyu instead, and maybe have this Akatsuki in the gunboat line, perhaps with improved guns, maybe tone down the torps a bit. You can't give everything to one ship, you have to balance it out if you want to do it, but they just feel so mismatched. It makes no sense. The ship I've been using the guns the most, T7 I've been using the guns the most on is in the torpedo line, and the ship that I've been using the torps the most on is on the gunboat line. And it feels like when they designed these lines, they didn't really like fully plan it out or fully consider what it was going to lead to, or what the end result would be. Well, our carrier just deleted at Port Königsberg. He was, of course, the only T5 on the enemy team. He was the lucky one who was dumb enough to still play T5 ships or the poor sod who was forced to play T5 ships in the current matchmaking. Which, of course, the current matchmaking is something I've criticized quite significantly, because it's ruined two of my pretty much tiers I enjoyed playing a lot of ships on, T5 and T6, and the matchmaking has kind of ruined them. Someone asking if I'm streaming today. Yep, that's the plan, just making some commentary. And they're talking about the Bayern. Bayern, of course, is one of the stronger German battleships, but enough about that. Since this game is ending, I think this game, I mean, the damage isn't that special, but let's see if this game could end soon. There's just a carrier left. Hopefully he'll get deleted very soon so I can show the scoreboard, because yes, I've landed 5 torps, and on average I would probably say that might even be more torps than I tend to land in the average Akatsuki game, because it's hard to really, with 10 km not that fast torps, it's hard to consistently land them, and sometimes you just end up using your guns instead because they seem to be a more consistent source of damage. Once again, neither of these ships are bad that I've covered. Neither the Akatsuki or the Shiratsuyu are bad ships. My biggest gripe is their positioning in the trees, because it makes no goddamn sense. Nice chunk of XP. Looking at the detailed report though, main gun damage is pretty, plus fires is more than the torps. What the hell?